Joining us now is former Dallas Cowboys defensive tackle and former OU great Tony Casillas. You can follow him on Twitter at TC Casillas or on Instagram on Instagram at Tony Casillas. Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I was great until I saw your Texas hoodie.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm talking to two Longhorns, but that's okay. My son actually graduated from Texas, so I had to hear for the last 5 years. And I always remember this. Texas is an academic school, Jane.
Wait, I cannot believe you actually allowed that. You allowed your son to go to Texas? How did I not know that?
I didn't allow it. My wife allowed it. No, I will give a plug. Texas is actually, you have to be very smart to get in there. And I'm talking to probably some overeducated people yourselves compared to, I'm not going to discard my degree from Oklahoma, but you have to be smart to get in that school. So I have no problem. He's doing well now. He's out. So more power to it. It's just part of the whole, giving each other
Tony, look,
time.
Full disclosure, Tony, I flunked out of summer school, which was the only way I was going to get in. And then I went to Austin Community College for a year. And then I was denied journalism school 3 times. So don't worry.
I think your career turned out pretty nicely for you, Jane.
We're all good.
Awesome.
We're all good. Thanks, Tony.
You know, I did the same thing with Neville Gallimore, not on purpose, but when we interviewed Neville Gallimore, I was wearing the Texas shirt. And, we've had a lot of discussion about the 88 club, but, we haven't talked about the 75 club. Are we getting that started now? Because you got you and Neville, that's the 2 OU alum defensive tackles wearing 75. Is that the next legacy we're getting going?
Well, it's not going to get all the glamour because of, it's not a sensational position. It's not romance like 88 and CeeDee Lamb. But, yeah, I think we should because we need to connect that 75, not only 75, but we need a defensive lineman to represent in this generation. So I think it's a great way to start the whole culture of that great number. So I'm all for that.
I'm always fascinated with how these guys come to get their numbers. How did yours come to be 75?
Well, that's a great question because I wanted 92 when I was number 92 at Oklahoma. So I wanted my 92 number when I went to Atlanta back in 1986 when I was drafted second player in the draft, and that's been a long time. But so I got there and I said, look, I want number 92. And they said, well, you can't wear number 92. I'm like, what? It wasn't like I had to buy it from someone, Jane. There was no one actually wearing it. I said, well, what's the deal? I didn't want 92. Well, you can't. It's already allocated. It's, you had to have something in the 70s. Well, I thought about one of the best players, defensive lineman in the league, and that was Howie Long. And I said, I'm going to go with 75. So let it be known that's the reason why I picked 75 because they wouldn't give it to me because of Howie Long, the great 75 with the rip technique. So I wanted to be like Howie.
That's awesome. I actually got into journalism because of Howie, watching Sundays, him and Jimmy Johnson with my dad, the Cowboys. I sort of fangirl every time I see Howie Long. So that's a great story.
When you look at the Cowboys locker room that you played in, you were here from 91 to 93 and then returned in 96. When you look at the structure of those locker rooms that you were in, a lot of people talked about how there was a lot of drama there and there was a lot of sideshows and potential distractions. But there was always chemistry and there was always a good nucleus and everybody worked well together. One of the criticisms that Dallas's defense got last year after playing really well in 2018 and kind of falling apart in 2019, some of the things we've heard are there may have just been some leadership and some chemistry issues. And so when it comes down to it, maybe they didn't have some distractions and things like that, but they were lacking that cohesiveness, I guess. How important is it, do you think, coming from a team that did have some distractions, maybe technically off the field, but still were a cohesive unit? How important do you think that leadership aspect is on defense and holding guys accountable for their assignments and what they're doing on the field?
Well, Bobby, first and foremost, you got to have the talent. You have to have the ability. You have to have a really good, players make a great offensively, defensively. And we had that. It's a different era. We had so much depth at the defensive line. And so we were able to compartmentalize that. We did things, and I always, the social media, when you look at your phone and there's instant, electronic media out there where you're at and what you're doing. I don't know how well we would have done back then, but we were able to compartmentalize how good we were because we paid attention to detail. And it was just a different type. For one, we had a coach that just wouldn't let us rest on our laurels. I mean, it didn't matter how great we were. He reminded me how bad we were and how bad we could become if we didn't take care of business. I look at this team, it was a step back, without a doubt. I mean, you look at last year. I mean, there was so much expectation coming off the year before, and then this really was an issue with them. When you sign someone like DeMarcus Lawrence who's making all this money, there's a high expectation. But I think ultimately they gave up a lot of big plays, and I think now it's different because you wear the star, and I'm just my experience of being able to be on those winning teams is that there's a brand there, and sometimes you get caught up in the brand and you really are not actually doing it on the field, which represents what how well that you're being admired, and how many followers you have on Instagram. I think sometimes that takes over. So I think that's the process now. I think on the field, everything that you do as far as getting the job done and being really well, that's going to take care of it. You take care of that, and the other thing will follow. And that's exactly what happened to us. We all were able to capitalize on how great we're on the field, let alone all the things that we like to do and have fun. We were just able to compartmentalize it.
What did you think of the Hot Boys brand?
I really don't. I'm not a proponent of it. I think the whole deal with San Francisco when there was this copyright infringement and everything. I think you can be as big as your brand if you're producing, and and I think I follow DeMarcus Lawrence. I think they do a lot of great things. I know they're doing things now. During the Corona, this pandemic, and providing meals and doing great things. But I mean, when you're arguing over a brand and the other team is in is in the Super Bowl, and you're arguing over a brand because you want to capitalize it, I really don't think you have much say in the whole copyright. I mean, I get it, but to me, I think it gets sidetracked. You really, again, and we just talked about, this, Jane and Bobby, that it's so like how big you are, how many followers you have and what pictures you have and how people, realistically want to be like you, but they can't because, for one, they're not going to be a professional athlete. Two, they're probably never going to be able to have the money that you have. So I think that gets lost in translation. I don't like that. I think, again, you produce on the field, I mean, the sky's the limit. I mean, we've seen that. And I think that the people realize everyone to go around. And if they realize that, then they wouldn't get lost and worried about their brand and just really actually producing on the field.
It is interesting, not to give too much away, but I know there are some guys that are immediately after games, they want their pictures. What action shots do you have of us for us to put on our Instagram? And then you look at some of the other guys, I consider them sort of the silent killers on the team. They don't really have that sort of stuff on there. So I do agree with you. I've seen it. These guys come in as rookies, and Jason Garrett always made them work for the star, and then they get the star. But you do see this transformation. Do you think Mike McCarthy is going to change that a little bit?
First of all, I don't want to sound like this old man, well,
it's easy to call you a boomer here.
Well, I'm an old man, but I don't want the perception, because I understand the generation. I'm on social media. We all know that's to be plugged in. You got to have that. But I've never liked the whole, and again, this probably sounds old school, about exchanging jerseys after the game. You watch The Last Dance. I mean, I understand the whole Isaiah Thomas not wanting to shake hands with him. I mean, it probably was the wrong thing to do, but that's kind of the vibe that I'd have after we got our asses kicked by the other team. So, Mike McCarthy, I don't know. I think that we all know that it's a little different the way they handle players at the Star, and I think that's one thing that's great about that. And I think sometimes maybe you have to caution yourself about that, because you may be able to get away with more with the Star because that's the brand. And I think players, without having to go out on the field and produce, are taking advantage of that. And I think there's a little resentment from some of the former players that have been there, that once won championships, that these guys haven't earned anything. And yet, they're instant here now. It's all about, let's get you, followers on Twitter, and let's get you a brand on Instagram. that gets lost in everything. I think Mike McCarthy is a tremendous coach. I've been a big admirer of him. I love what he did with Green Bay, and I think he's going to be good for this team. And I think we've already seen a lot of some of the, maybe people aren't giving as much credit, but we've already seen the changes that he's made and some of the players he's picked and the guys that he's drafted. I think that's definitely a thumbprint of Mike McCarthy, without a doubt.
Now, when you mentioned the word resentment, and that maybe there's a little bit of resentment from the older guys. You guys haven't earned this. Speaking of that term resentment, I know that's been a word that's been brought up this offseason in terms of if Dak Prescott's not going to take part in some of these virtual OTAs and be in these meetings while he's trying to get a contract done, would there potentially be any locker room resentment? Do you think that there's any chance guys in the locker room would have ill feelings towards Dak's mode of trying to negotiate this and maybe not participating in some of these voluntary activities, if that is the case? Or do you think that guys in that locker room look at it as, hey, you're trying to get your money, go get your money?
Well, I think it's so different now, the way with this whole pandemic, guys can't go out to the facility. They can't, there's no OTAs, there's no organized workouts. It's just totally just so weird to be able to have to go through that. Look, I think Andy Dalton was just an unbelievable opportunity for the Cowboys. I think Andy Dalton is a much better security blanket insurance policy than someone like Cooper Rush. And we all know this. We all know that ultimately Dak Prescott is going to get signed a deal. I do think this, though. I think that there is a thought process with Jerry Jones and the organization that, look, if this goes longer than we think, and we don't know even what the landscape of football is going to be like in September, that we sleep better at night knowing that we have someone like Andy Dalton that can be our starting quarterback. As far as players, look, I think it's a business. Everyone gets what they need to get. Dak needs to get paid. But you know what? There's a difference between some guy asking for $10 million and a guy asking for $40 million. That's a lot. That's leaps and bounds. So, whether he gets 33 or 35 or gets a 5-year deal, when you start talking about those numbers, it's kind of out of the stratosphere when you got some dude making, the minimum salary, and you got even a guy making $10 million. It's like, I can't even fathom that. So he needs to get what he can. But I think ultimately, now, with Andy Dalton, it makes it a little easier to maybe think, sit across that table with Dak Prescott and say, well, hey, this is what we're going to offer you. Well, think about it. And, if we don't get it done, then we got an insurance policy.
It is tricky. And I want to ask you, as a player, how do you get into those conversations with your agent you've got an agent telling you this is your best time to seize, make the money that you deserve. This contract's important for you. It's important for your security. But also, as you said, there's an optics, even more so than when you were playing, about what you're asking and how it looks to your teammates in the locker room.
Well, I think that there's an unwritten rule. A quarterback's going to be the highest paid player. And you're like, okay, well, I'd love to be a quarterback, but I'm not. And once you realize what a quarterback goes through, you probably don't want to be a quarterback because there's so much that goes along with that. There's a two sides to that, Jane. An agent's trying to get as much as he can because whatever his percentage is, that just means more that he's going to. So there's a twofold thing in this. But I think ultimately there's a slot where these quarterbacks and any player makes. And ultimately you try to just try to milk whatever you can on across the table out of each other. And then after everything is kind of settled, and you're like, okay, this is as far as I'm going to go. And then finally, it just comes down to the player. It's like, look, I'm good. If we're only $1 million apart, hey, or $2 million or whatever that may be, you have that bottom number. So I think it's, for players, it's hard to sit there and like, gosh, I'm passing up that much money. But ultimately, you're going to get it. I think that's you get a false sense of security, but underlying that it's going to happen. But it's hard. It's a tough position to be in.
Call me optimistic. I just think that this thing's going to get done because we saw the DeMarcus Lawrence thing get contentious. Ezekiel Elliott happens literally at the last minute. He fell asleep and they had to call him multiple times to wake him up and get him to training camp there in Dallas. Now, I will say, they didn't have a guy behind DeMarcus Lawrence that they could plug and play, or for that matter, really Ezekiel Elliott, despite the fact they had Tony Pollard and Alfred Moore. So I think it's interesting, this little cat and mouse game that these two are playing as we get closer to July 15th. And as you said, with this pandemic and, with the not having that touch point of having him, in the building or around his teammates, it is, last summer when people asked him about it, I was like, oh, this thing's getting done. And it's fascinating to me that since the exclusive tag was put on, I was told just the other day they haven't had any meaningful conversations with his camp. So interesting stuff.
Well, and look, I mean, it'd be a lot different if you actually physically could, not show up at the Star or whatever facility you are. But since you are, the players aren't able to go to the facility, so it's a little different anyway. So I think it'd be a little odd to not be able to physically be there around your teammates. But I mean, Dak's going to be fine. He's a smart dude. I mean, he'll grasp onto Mike McCarthy's system. He'll be fine. And look, I think with the players like CeeDee Lamb and some of the people they have coming back, I mean, they have a lot of opportunity, and I think it's very exciting. I think for me, if I was Jerry, under the circumstances of this being a new regime, a new offense, so to speak, I would try to have more sense of urgency to get the deal done, because I'm excited about a new opportunity. I mean, we all talked about Jason Garrett's stale offense and, what they tried to do, and really was a standstill. So now it's just like, look, it's new, man. It's like getting a new car, right? So, you're getting used to all the buttons and everything. You get a fancy car and it goes fast. I mean, this is an opportunity. So to me, that would be the only incentive for me to try to get something done so we can all get, everyone back together whenever that may be. We just don't know, right?
Now, briefly, just here as we're wrapping up, and I know we mentioned the Mike McCarthy thing, and a lot of people may not realize that. I know you had about a cup of coffee, just a little bit of off-season time in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And Mike McCarthy was there at that time as an offensive quality control coach. Do you remember him at all?
No, I don't. My deal when I was in Kansas City was kind of weird, because I signed a contract and I went and got a second opinion on a medical issue, and Marty Schottenheimer was a coach at that time, and I just didn't really feel comfortable, going to training camp. But I didn't even know that Mike McCarthy. I mean, he was probably thin back then. I mean, a skinny dude, man. Not that he is now, but I mean, he was just a lot younger. So I don't remember that. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. Quality control.
Speaking of quality control, we talk about a lot of people having to control Michael Irvin, both on the field and off of it during his playing time, something he's very candid about. But we've got him coming up here on the show. Your favorite story about Michael during your playing time?
Oh, God, there's a lot of them. I'm trying to think. I think the best story was on the way back from we got beat by Washington. And it was a Monday night game. And we all know that Jimmy hates to lose, right? I mean, he just doesn't. Like, he can't think realistically that you should lose. All right, so we lost the game, run away back, and Michael Irvin. We said the players sit in the back of the plane, and the players are in the coaches and all the staff in the front of the media. So we're sitting back there. We're playing. Well, I'm not. And it's just you don't want to talk because Jimmy's up. He's pissed. So he's sitting up in the front. And so next thing you know, we see Jimmy walking back to the back of the plane, and Michael Irvin, and I think it was Frank Cornish, we're playing cards. And so Jimmy starts walking back, and you know how you see someone, like you just see the boss or someone, your teacher, you're quiet, you get quiet. So we all get quiet. So Frank Cornish and Michael Irvin were playing cards, and so we all get quiet. And so next thing you know it, Jimmy, Frank Cornish, God bless him, he passed away a few years ago. He's always laughing, right? So he's looking down, he's laughing. They're playing cards, and Jimmy, he didn't see Jimmy. He looks up, and Jimmy goes, "What the hell are you laughing at, Frank? We just got our asses kicked by the Redskins." And he looks at him, and he goes, "I'll deal with you tomorrow." And Michael Irvin grabs his arm, right, and says, "Man, that's okay. He won't cut you." And so that was a good story. And Michael, man, you know, the one thing with Michael is that his bravado. I mean, that's the way he always is. I mean, when he's on, you know, he's a broadcaster and everything, his energy is always at a high level. But the one thing I always remember with him, and you always talk about this, you always talk about the comparison with the 88s. When he demanded the ball, you know, it was just sincere. It wasn't like screaming or anything like that, because he wanted the ball. He wanted Troy to throw on the ball because he would make plays. And what I remember about him, he followed through. A lot of guys can't say that. And that's one thing I always remember about Michael. I mean, he was always the energetic, the always passionate guy. If we needed a spark, I mean, you know, during training camp or anything, that dude right there would always kind of, he for some reason, he'd make us laugh or just do something where we just shake our head and like, okay, we're good.
Well, before I let you go, I lied to you, because when I get guys, you know, from that era, that was obviously the team I grew up on. And so I Football Life with Troy Aikman was one of my absolute favorite ones that's ever come out.
So don't tell me, you're pretty young. So what you don't even mention it.
I'm not that young, but I was in high school during one of the parades. So what?
Oh, okay, that's good.
Yeah, okay, I'm not that young.
No, I don't feel that bad now.
So favorite story about Tony before we let you go? Troy, rather.
Oh, Troy, man, you know what? He was such a fierce competitor. And when I say this, I don't mean it in a negative way. He was constructive. He was stoically, if that's a word, constructive. He was like that, but in a way where he wanted people to respect him, because that's the way he handled his position, his leadership role. But we'd have 2 minutes on a Friday, right? And we'd go through, it's kind of like a walkthrough, not a walkthrough, but it was, you know, we had pads every day back in those days. So Friday, we had no pads, and we're like, this is great. So we had a 2 minute at the very end, and it was just something you go through the 10-minute drill. But every time someone would mess up, you'd hear so many F-bombs from Troy Aikman that everybody just shattered the whole field. And when Troy spoke, when he got pissed off like that, everyone listened. And we'd start back a drill, and it was his perfection. So I always remember that. That dude was just he was such a leader, and he wanted perfection, especially on a Friday when a lot of us went out there and thinking, you know, this is kind of a blow-off day. But the execution 2-minute drill, just to listen to him, you know, rattle off a couple of F-bombs was kind of, we knew we were ready.
It's so funny. DeMarco Murray once told me that Jason Garrett demanded a lot of his players at practice. And when you juxtapose people talking about Troy and Jimmy at practice, even though DeMarco told me that, I just have a hard time believing it was anywhere close to that sort of intensity. And I think that's sort of intensity. Exactly. Yes.
Jason, I think that was his word of preference too. I've been around Jason, and you don't see that. That's the thing about it. You don't see behind the curtain, but man, the preparation part of it, hey, it's serious business. And that's what makes those guys such great leaders. I mean, all of them, because they don't let that stuff pass by. Like, let's start it again. We'll perfect it, and then we'll be ready for the weekend.
Well, you are always so awesome to have on. I really appreciate you coming on. And if you're interested, we'd love to have you back.
Hey, anytime. Thanks for having me. Even if you guys are a couple Longhorns, I still love you.
We appreciate you, Tony.